What's up, fight fans? This is Kurt DeVille with Counterpunch Boxing News, and I have some new news and a new series concerning referees. As promised, this is the new series on Counterpunch Boxing News. It's called Referees Review. And I like to start, and I was trying to figure out where I was going to start, but we have to start at the very top. And I think one of the best referees in the game is Tony Weeks. Tony Weeks has had nearly 900 bouts, okay? 858 to be exact. He's known for a lot of classic fights. I mean, the Ward Kovalev 2, Corrales Castillo, Mayweather Maidana 1, Mayweather versus Cotto. We had one of the bloodiest fights that we've ever seen, Marcus Brown versus Badu Jack, if you guys can remember. And of course, we have fights like upsets like Klitschko versus Fury. And one thing I want to touch basis on is you have to know what to do or when to do. A referee is so very important in there because he's the only man besides the fighters that's there. He makes sure what to look for. He has to make sure by experience and by repetition on who's fighting, but at the same time, be no respecter of persons. Just know who you're dealing with the habits they possess, because he's been in there with pretty much everyone there is to know about someone, okay? One of the best fights, Corrales and Castillo, you know, I think that was probably the best demonstration of patience that I've seen any referee have. And to me, I think referees, they have a certain type of tolerance. And I think that tolerance has a lot to do with patience, because a lot of time, just like fighters, referees can get antsy, they can get impatient, and they can make mistakes, okay? And looking at Castillo, dropping Corrales, going down, it showed me that Tony Weeks was practicing patience, because he counted him out, as you guys can see. He counted him, and he allowed Corrales to get up. Now notice his eyes were swollen. We don't know if he could see properly out of those particular out of those eyes, that he could see properly. And Tony Weeks did his thing. He still counted him, even though, you know, the second one, he was dropped down again, as you guys know. And Dan Goosen, you know, again, was trying to coach him, like, get him out of there. Tony Weeks was like, hey, put the mouthpiece in, let's go. You know, and this is something that Tony Weeks said from that. He said, it was my toughest fight at that point. It was on HBO, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, Larry Merchant is going to have a feels day with this one, said Weeks after the fight. Weeks said experienced trainers told him that he did a good job and that the fight would have been hard to officiate for any experienced referee. Of course, boxing fans worldwide remember the iconic Diego Corrales versus Jose Luis Castillo bout and how it ended. If you guys don't know, please look it up. And Tony Weeks said, he said this. He said a lot of fighters back then fought each other in their prime, like Thomas Hearn, Roberto Duran. Today, it's more of a business, and I understand it to be a certain point. Despite the inevitable cons of boxing and the unprecedented environment that world currently faces, Tony Weeks does not plan on stepping out of the ring anytime soon. He said, God willing, you'll be seeing me for a while. I have a love for it and I respect it. When it becomes a job, I think it'll be time for me to go. When I can no longer physically, mentally do it, it'll be time for me to go. I just want to do it for as long as I can. That's all. And let me counterpunch. The origin of Tony Weeks, okay? And Weeks was into boxing from a young age. He was always a huge fan of the legendary Muhammad Ali, a figure that Weeks deems as bigger than boxing. His refereeing track dates back to the time working as a recreational supervisor at a federal prison. At the time, he helped organize a boxing exhibition as a trainer, was interested in training one of the inmates. A ring was set up there, the rec yard, and inmates were turning down visits as they excitedly anticipated the new the new thing in the federal system. This would be the first time Weeks stepped into the ring to referee a match. Instantly, he said, I fell in love with it, and who was complimented that day for his natural movement and instincts. He also judges UFC fights as well. He said the protection of the fighters is first and foremost. It is our responsibility that the general public bears no responsibility for what happens in the ring. We referees do, said Tony Weeks. So the 2000s Bernard Hopkins versus Antoine Eccles 2 match was Weeks' first time officiating a major televised fight. This was Friday night fights in Las Vegas. However, the highly anticipated Tito Trinidad versus Fernando Vargas was the following night, resulting in a big crowd for Hopkins versus Eccles as well. And thinking of that fight, that was a very dirty, murky fight. And it was his first fight officiating that particular difficult fight. It shows that he had to have a love for it. You know, it showed that he had a natural gift for refereeing. And a lot of people don't look at refereeing as, you know, someone with talent. But, oh, make no mistake about it. You have to know what the hell you're doing. If you don't know, you're going to end up criticized. You're going to end up on that shit list. A lot of fighters won't recommend you. A lot of sanctioning bodies won't recommend you. There's a reason why Tony Weeks is where he's at. Okay. Now, all of these fights that I mentioned before, all of these are great examples, you know, especially the Badu fight, the Badu Jack fight. You know, let's say Tony Weeks had a thing for blood and he couldn't stand it. He would have called that fight off a long time ago, but you can't have that type of mentality. I think between him being in the federal system and knowing how to properly, respectfully and professionally call certain things and talk to certain people, I think he brings that into the ring. You know, those are all good fights that I mentioned, but there is one that people do talk about concerning Tony Weeks, and you will hear from every referee, you know, some more bad than good. In this case, some good, more good than bad. Okay. And it wasn't a situation where Canelo versus Angulo, it was stopped in the 10th round, and Angulo took a lot of punishment from Canelo, but I don't think Angulo was hurt like that. And Tony Weeks stopped it after a vicious uppercut, I believe, landed to Angulo. And, you know, Virgil Hunter, the trainer, was furious. So he had a lot to say about Tony Weeks that night. And Tony counterpunching everything. He says, I don't lose any sleep over it. It doesn't bother me at all. I believe it was a good stoppage. You know, it was one of those fights where Canelo was pretty much punishing Angulo. You know, and so at what point, maybe, just maybe, he would have a puncher's chance. But giving Canelo and knowing Canelo versus someone like Angulo, Alfredo Pedro Angulo, he didn't see that fight going forward, you know, and the argument was, well, if you let it go to 10 rounds, why not 12? But again, that's one of those situations where it's somewhat controversial. But other than that, Tony Weeks is a standout guy. He's been in, again, iconic fights you can't duplicate, fights you don't want to duplicate. He was that third man in the ring, and I think he did a fantastic job throughout his referee's career. But anyway, you guys tell me what you think of this first edition of Referees Review. Of course, please subscribe. And you guys been Counterpunch. Peace.